Hi.
I'm Lyra. And while my grandfather lay dying in surgery, my parents and sister were popping champagne on a cruise ship. They called it a family trip. But I wasn't invited. I was home, signing medical documents, holding his hand, listening to him whisper names I later found crossed out in his will. He trusted me. They erased me. They said grief made me dramatic. But they didn't expect I'd find the video. Didn't expect I'd find the forged papers. Now they're the ones being erased. And it all started with one missing chair at the dinner table. Ever wonder what a quiet betrayal sounds like? It was close to midnight when the sliding doors of Chicago General hissed open, swallowing me into the sterile brightness that smelled faintly of bleach and burnt coffee. The corridors were nearly empty, except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beeping that came from somewhere down the hall. My grandfather, Dorian, had been rushed into surgery just 15 minutes earlier. They didn't let me go in. Immediate family only, the nurse said, not even looking up from her clipboard. I was family, but I didn't argue. I just nodded and sat down in the waiting area with the old leather wallet he'd given me a few hours before. It was cracked and warm from his hands. Inside was a folded note written in his shaky handwriting. "You're the only one I trust, Lyra." I read it again, pressing my thumb over the words as if the ink might still be wet. He had looked at me right before they wheeled him away, eyes soft but tired, like he already knew something I didn't. The clock above the vending machine ticked past midnight. I pulled my phone out and tried calling my mother. No answer. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. Then, against my better judgment, I called my sister, Callista. The phone rang once, then buzzed. A photo popped up instead of a reply. A sunlit deck, champagne flutes raised, smiling faces against a glittering ocean. The caption read, "Celebrating life. Cheers to Grandpa's spirit." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. My reflection looked ghost-like in the darkened glass. He wasn't gone yet. He was still in there, fighting for every breath, while they were toasting him like some chapter already closed. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I tried to justify it at first. Maybe they didn't understand how bad it was. Maybe they thought the surgery was routine. But I knew better. My mother had known the risks. She just didn't want her vacation interrupted. A nurse walked by and smiled politely, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. I nodded back and looked down at the tile floor. Every square reflected the harsh ceiling lights, cold and perfect, just like the life my family had built, shiny on the outside, hollow underneath. I leaned back in the plastic chair, my mind drifting through old memories that hurt more than they should have. Every Christmas, every birthday, every family dinner, I was the one clearing plates while Callista posed for photos. When I tried to speak, they talked over me. When I succeeded at something, it was lucky timing. "Don't make everything so emotional, Lyra," my mother used to say whenever I cried. "You always take things too personally." Callista would smirk from across the table. Perfect hair, perfect smile. "I handle the big things you handle. Feelings. That's what you're good at." And so I learned to swallow everything, anger, disappointment, loneliness, until it became part of me. Sitting in that waiting room, I felt like the invisible thread holding a family portrait together, frayed but still doing the job no one noticed. The automatic doors slid open again, breaking my thoughts. A nurse ran past with a clipboard, whispering into her radio. I stood up immediately. "What's happening?" She hesitated. He's not responding well." My stomach dropped. "Can I see him?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's against protocol." I followed her anyway until I reached the glass window of the operating room. Through it, I could see a blur of movement, hands pressing on his chest, doctors murmuring numbers, a machine shrieking in protest. The sound flattened into a single, long tone. A doctor looked up, eyes heavy with the expression I'd seen before, the one that said it was over. I pressed my forehead to the glass. My voice came out as a whisper.
You weren't alone, Grandpa.
"I'm right here." No one heard me, but I said it again anyway. When they finally came out, the surgeon's words blurred together. Massive cardiac arrest. We did everything we could. Time of death.
Time.
That word stuck in my chest like a splinter. How could it stop for him while everyone else kept celebrating? I walked out of the hospital as dawn began to crawl over the horizon. The air was cold, biting through my thin sweater. The world felt quiet, too quiet, like it knew what had just happened and was holding its breath. I checked my phone again. Nothing. Not a missed call. Not a message. On the family group chat, Callista had finally replied to my text from hours ago. Just a heart emoji. Nothing else. The absurdity of it made me laugh once, a short, cracked sound that echoed across the parking lot. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and whispered, "Yeah, love you too." I sat in my car for a long time, watching the sky shift from purple to gray. Around me, the city was waking up, people heading to work, taxis honking, someone jogging past with earbuds in. Life went on.
For them anyway.
For me, everything had just stopped. It took me almost an hour to drive home. Every red light felt like a test I was failing. Stay calm, don't cry, keep breathing. When I finally stepped inside my apartment, the silence was too much. The refrigerator hummed, a clock ticked softly, and that was all. I dropped my bag by the door and noticed a folded document sticking out from my jacket pocket. The hospital paperwork. I opened it automatically, scanning the text until my eyes caught a line that made me freeze. Family representative, Callista Dorian Hale. Not me. My name wasn't there, not even in the fine print. He trusted me, told me so himself. But officially, legally, I was no one. I sank onto the couch, the paper trembling in my hands. Not even in his last moments, I whispered. They erased me. Again. The phone buzzed, startling me. A notification appeared on the screen. Callista Hale is live. Grandpa Dorian, a life worth celebrating. My breath hitched. For a second, I thought I misread it. Then her voice came through, too bright, too cheerful. Grandpa always said, live fully, love loudly. So tonight, we're doing just that. Cheers to a life worth celebrating. I stared at the glowing screen, my hands shaking. Behind her, I could see the reflection of the ocean, laughter, champagne glasses clinking. The world thought they were honoring him. I knew better. They were washing their guilt away with expensive wine. I turned off the phone, leaned back against the couch, and closed my eyes. The sound of the ocean still played in my head, mixed with the last echo of the heart monitor, a single, endless tone. A life worth celebrating, she said, while I was still wiping blood off my shoes. The video ended, but I just kept staring at the black screen like it owed me something. Maybe an explanation. Maybe an apology. I sat on my couch for what felt like hours, the silence of my apartment broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional honk of a distant car. Everything felt so far away. I hadn't even changed clothes yet, my jeans still stiff with dried blood from gripping Grandpa Dorian's wrist as the life drained out of him. Morning light crept through the blinds, brushing over the floor like it didn't know what had happened. As if the world just kept going. My fingers were still trembling when I set the phone down. I stood up, knees aching from sitting too long, and wandered to the kitchen. I poured some coffee, reheated from yesterday. Bitter, stale, but it was something warm to hold. The mug shook in my hand as I opened the live stream again. Callista stood on the cruise ship deck, wind gently blowing her salon-perfect hair, dressed in white linen like some sainted widow. Grandpa was more than just a grandfather, she said, voice quivering just enough to seem authentic. He was a father figure. The reason I fight for what's right every day. I nearly dropped my coffee. She sniffled, dabbed her dry cheek with a tissue. People clapped in the background. A man even shouted, "We love you, Callista." I stood there in my dim kitchen, wearing sweatpants and an old hoodie Grandpa had left in my car once, stained with oil and time. My eyes burned, not from tears, but from sheer disbelief. She was rewriting history on a floating stage, and no one knew any better. I took a slow sip, trying not to choke on the bitterness. Around 10 that morning, I drove back to the hospital. I needed to sign some documents, or at least I thought I did. The halls felt different in daylight, less sacred, more like an office. Sterile. Functional. A woman behind the reception desk looked up when I approached. "I'm here to complete the paperwork for Dorian Hale. I'm his granddaughter, Lyra." She typed for a moment, then frowned. "I'm sorry," she said. "You're not listed as a legal representative. Only Callista Hale and your parents have authority to sign." I blinked. "That can't be right." He told me. She gave a polite but firm smile. "I'm afraid it's already been processed." I stood there, stunned. My mouth opened but nothing came out. There it was. Erased. Not just emotionally, but officially. On paper, I didn't exist in his last moments. Outside, I sat in my car for nearly 30 minutes before I could drive away. The words Grandpa had whispered weeks ago came back to me like a lifeline. Your loyalty means more than blood signatures. I had believed him, but apparently the law didn't. Later that afternoon, I visited the cemetery. He'd wanted to be buried at Greenwood Ridge, under the old elm trees. I remembered that detail because I was the only one who actually listened when he talked. The grounds crew was setting up already, rows of white folding chairs, a podium, floral wreaths shaped like anchors. Callista's idea, no doubt. He loved the sea, she once said. Never mind that he spent the last 10 years afraid of boats after slipping on one. I walked around the side, careful not to be seen. A man in a security vest glanced at me, confused. Media or catering? He asked. I shook my head. Neither. Family. He checked his list, then said, "You're not on here." "Sorry, ma'am." I didn't argue. I just backed away and found a quiet spot under a maple tree, where I could see the crowd but stay invisible. Fitting, really. Cars arrived one by one, shiny, black, expensive. My parents stepped out in coordinated outfits, faces composed, like they'd practiced in the mirror. My mother clutched a single white rose. My father adjusted his tie like the heat was too much. And then Callista, glowing in soft pastels, escorted by some local news anchor. The cameras rolled. She took the podium with practiced poise. Her voice cracked on cue. My grandfather taught me to be strong, to fight for justice, to always speak the truth. My chest tightened. Lies, all of it. But people nodded, some dabbed tears. I watched the entire service from behind that tree, heart hollow. Not because I wasn't invited to speak. No, that would have been too much to expect, but because no one even noticed I wasn't there. Not one glance around. Not one "Where's Lyra?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing my apartment like something inside me wouldn't settle. I thought about all the times they told me I was too sensitive, that I overreacted. How many lies had I swallowed to keep peace? I remembered one particular day, maybe 6 months ago. I'd come home early from work and overheard my mother and Callista talking in the kitchen. "Once he's gone, the estate needs to be simplified," Callista said. Her tone was tight, controlled. "Lyra doesn't need to be involved," my mother had replied. "She's not like us. She gets too emotional." Back then, I convinced myself I'd misheard. Or misunderstood.
But now?
It played in my mind like a confession. Around 2 in the morning, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I found the recording of Callista's live stream. I watched it again, closely this time. Every blink. Every sentence. Until I reached the part that made my blood run cold. I held his hand until his last breath, she said, voice cracking.
No.
No, she didn't. I was there. I held his hand. She wasn't even in the country. I paused the video and stared at the frozen frame of her solemn expression. My voice cut through the silence of my apartment, sharp and certain. She lied. On national television. I stared at the frozen frame of Callista's face, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. The phone slipped from my hand, landing face down on the hardwood floor with a dull thud. The silence that followed was deafening. She lied.
Not just a misstep.
Not a misremembered moment. A full-blown fabrication, designed for sympathy, for admiration, for public adoration. The live stream paused on her tear-streaked face, the perfect angle, the soft lighting. My laptop sat open on the coffee table, daring me to press play again. Her words echoed in my head, words meant to rewrite history. I leaned forward, grabbed my notebook, and began to scrawl in urgent strokes. He whispered my name. He asked for me. That was the truth. I was the one holding his hand. I was the one who whispered to him in those final hours in the ICU. Not her. She wasn't even in Chicago when he passed. She was in Napa, hosting a wellness retreat. She didn't return until the will was nearly filed. That final statement of hers, "I was holding him," was not grief. It was performance. A betrayal spun for applause. An hour passed in heavy silence. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I didn't move, except to hit replay. Over and over, I watched it again. This time, not as a grieving granddaughter, but as a skeptic. Every word she uttered was a thread I pulled at. Grandpa was more than a grandfather. He told me I was his legacy. Your faith made him proud. Too perfect. Too smooth.
Too polished.
Her voice trembled in all the right places, her hands clutching a folded tissue, like a prop in a stage play. It felt rehearsed. Because it was. By mid-morning, I couldn't stay in my apartment. The walls felt too tight, too full of echoes. I needed proof. I needed something tangible. So I grabbed my keys and drove, hands trembling slightly on the wheel. My grandfather's estate loomed ahead like a cathedral of memory. The front gate still bore the Hale family crest, wrought iron, elegant, intimidating. The front door was slightly ajar. Odd, but I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside, breathing in the smell of old wood and dust. The air was still, sacred. I climbed the staircase slowly, the creak of each step a sound I remembered from childhood. At the top, I turned toward the attic. The attic had always felt like a secret room, where time stood still. Dust particles floated in the sunlight like ghosts. I opened the door gently and ducked beneath the low ceiling. There, tucked behind crates and boxes, was the trunk, the one I'd never dared open before. I pulled it forward, heart racing, and flipped the lid. Inside were layers of yellowed letters, old journals, and war memorabilia. I dug deeper and found what I came for, an envelope with my name, scrawled in my grandfather's trembling hand. I clutched it to my chest. Then I saw the tapes. Dozens of them, labeled by year. I inserted one into the dusty VCR perched near the wall. The screen flickered to life with static, then showed a family gathering, perhaps Thanksgiving. Grandpa sat in his armchair, looking into the camera. "Lyra," he said, his voice warm, eyes twinkling. "You're my rock. You always stayed when everyone else wandered off." Tears stung my eyes, uninvited. But then, something strange. The camera panned across the living room bookshelf. I froze the frame. A familiar row of folders. One binder stood out by its absence, a gap. The same gap I had seen in the photo taken at the law firm's office, where the estate files were supposedly stored. My stomach knotted. Then a sound, a faint creak. A door, behind me. I froze. Every instinct went still. Someone had been here. The last person I had seen walking down this hallway only a few weeks ago? Callista. Panic clenched my throat, but I swallowed it down. I quickly ejected the tape and erased the screen history. I slipped the envelope into my coat, sealed the trunk again, and crept down the stairs with silent, practiced steps. By afternoon, I was back in my car. But I wasn't done. I scoured TikTok for posts Callista had made after the funeral. It didn't take long. One clip had gone viral. Black and white photos of Grandpa, soft piano music in the background. Her face filled the screen, luminous in candlelight. "A goodbye to the man who made me who I am," she wrote in the caption. The comments were worshipful. "You're so brave. Such raw beauty in your grief. Your pain shines." I scrolled until the praise became static. It was all a performance. A story she built for clout, sympathy, and control. Then I remembered Mrs. Halbert, the longtime housekeeper who had worked for my grandparents for over 2 decades. I called her, heart pounding. She picked up after the third ring. "Yes, Lyra," she said gently. "Your sister came by last week." "What for?" She asked for Grandpa's war medals and some of the legal files. Said she was simplifying the legacy. "Legal files?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A pause.
Yes.
She said there were papers in the attic that needed to be cleared for the lawyers. My mouth went dry. She had been here. She had taken something. And not just mementos, documents. Originals. I thanked Mrs. Halbert and hung up, staring at the windshield as the sky outside turned gray. I sat motionless for a while, just breathing, just remembering all the times I was told to be quiet. All the moments I let slide because keeping the peace was easier. No more. I unlocked my encrypted notepad and typed, "Corvin, grandfather's lawyer. Last seen with Callista." Then I scheduled an appointment for the next morning using a false name. When I returned to my apartment, the silence felt heavier than before. I placed the envelope on the coffee table and backed up everything, videos, notes, photos, onto multiple drives. I created a folder and labeled it, Truth Leaks. If there was a trail, I would find it. If there wasn't, I'd blaze one myself. Then a notification pinged on my laptop, a live airing of a new special, Callista's Journey, Healing from Loss. I clicked. Soft lighting, slow piano, her voice trembling just enough. Then she said it again, softly. I was holding his hand when he left us. I didn't flinch this time. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound echoed across the room like a gavel. I stood up, walked to the window, and whispered to my reflection, "This ends now." A soft chime from my laptop echoed in the silence of my living room. It was an ordinary sound, yet it struck like a final note in a long symphony of denial. I stared at the screen for a long moment before pressing the power button, watching the glow fade into black. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that comes before a storm. My chest tightened, not from fear anymore, but from something deeper. Resolve. This had gone on long enough. Just after dawn, I slipped out of my apartment, deliberately blending in plain jeans, a faded navy sweater, and sneakers that muffled my steps. My hair was tied back into a no-nonsense ponytail. No makeup. No rings. No traces of the woman they expected me to be. I didn't want to be recognized, not today. The drive to Corvin and Associates took 45 minutes. I spent each one rehearsing what I would say, what I wouldn't say. Their building sat like a well-fed secret on the edge of a business park, its sandstone exterior and shaded windows giving nothing away. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed the fall leaves twirling in the breeze like little warnings from the trees themselves. My heart pounded so loudly, it felt like a second pulse in my ears. I stepped inside and found myself in a sleek lobby lined with gray tile, a scent of citrus polish and filtered air clinging to every surface. The receptionist glanced up, polite but indifferent. "I'm here to consult about an estate plan," I said. My voice was even. I handed her a driver's license, a real one, but issued under my legal middle name and rural address I once used for college registrations. Ava Bellamy. She nodded, motioned to the waiting area. I sat near a corner, back straight, trying not to let my nerves show. My eyes drifted to the wall behind her desk, a series of bronze-framed certificates, leather-bound portfolios stacked beneath them. Then I saw it. A thin glint of gold ink caught the overhead lights, one folder neatly labeled Hale, Dorian. My stomach dropped. My breath caught in my throat like a held scream. When they called me in, I met with a junior associate. She was young, kind-eyed, professional, likely unaware of anything beyond client files and paperwork. I kept my voice light, my question simple. I asked about posthumous asset protection, about multi-generational trusts. I even chuckled once, pretending to be confused by the terminology. It was all an act. Then, the opportunity I'd hoped for. Her assistant stepped out to retrieve a pamphlet. I leaned slightly over the desk, my phone shielded by a legal pad. I angled the camera and tapped once, capturing the binder grid behind her, specifically the one labeled Dorian Hale, Estate Trust. The name was bold, the signature beneath it looked wrong, like it had been retouched. The ink in his name was darker than the rest of the line, almost unnaturally bold. Something had been altered. When I left the building, my hands were cold, my fingertips tingling. I found a quiet bench down the block, hidden behind a row of shrubbery. I pulled out my phone and zoomed into the photo I'd taken.
There.
A clause, executor, Lyra Hale. But it had been scratched out. Another name typed over mine in faint, misaligned text. Whoever did this didn't expect anyone to look this closely. But I did. And I remembered. The night before Dorian's surgery, he had pulled me aside during the chaos of a family dinner. He looked pale, weary, but his eyes were focused. "If you ever feel they tried to rewrite who I was," he said, handing me a sealed envelope, "open this. There's proof inside." But I never opened it, because the envelope disappeared days later. It had been on the dining room table, nestled beside his briefcase. I remembered now. Callista had insisted we all switch seats that night, and I'd seen her near the table while I refilled my glass. I had dismissed the sight, assuming she was just being nosy.
But now?
It all felt coordinated.
Calculated.
I called Thaddeus. He had been Dorian's most trusted friend, a former cybersecurity analyst who helped Grandpa protect personal records over the years. He answered after 2 rings. "I need you to trace something," I said without preamble. "It's urgent." Hours passed. I sat in my car outside a cafe, fingers drumming the steering wheel until my phone finally vibrated. A single text. "Files altered 3 days post-surgery. Metadata shows IP. Corvin and Associates." Then another line. "One transaction. Substantial. From Callista's personal account. Memo. Consulting fee." My vision blurred. I blinked quickly, adrenaline burning through my limbs. By nightfall, I stood in the foyer of my mother's house. The air still smelled of expensive orchid arrangements and over-polished furniture. She appeared from the hallway, as poised as always, her pearl earrings perfectly in place. "You're going to tear this family apart, Lyra," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't respond right away. I opened the manila folder I brought and placed it firmly on the marble kitchen counter. Inside, screenshots of the altered will, the payment receipt, and a transcript of the original clause. Her face tightened as she read. "You already did," I said, "when you chose to sell out his legacy like a cheap favor." She turned her back on me, staring into the dimly lit hallway as if she could find another version of this moment where she wasn't caught. But she didn't say a word, didn't deny a thing. I left without slamming the door. Silence had more power now. That night, I returned home and accessed the encrypted cloud vault Dorian used for private files. It required voice authentication. Thankfully, he'd added my voice sprint a year before. A flicker. A low-resolution video loaded on screen. Dorian sat at his desk, gaunt but composed. His eyes stared straight into the camera, unsmiling. "If you're watching this," he said slowly, "they've betrayed both of us. You know what to do." I pressed pause and sat there in the dark, listening to the echo of his voice fade into the room. I wouldn't stay silent anymore. I carried the weight of his voice through the night like an ember buried deep in my chest, hot, growing, consuming everything in its path. Sleep never came. The betrayal smoldered, flickering under my ribs, turning the stillness of my apartment into a crucible. I paced the living room in loops, weaving between boxes of old files and documents Grandpa had once warned me to keep safe for a rainy day. Well, the storm had arrived. Somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m., I found myself crouched on the floor, my fingers trembling as I opened the hidden folder on my phone. The grainy video, barely a few minutes long, glowed like a lantern in the dark. I pressed play. Again. There he was, Grandpa, framed tightly in the camera lens, his eyes sunken but fierce, as if he were speaking from the very edge of time. His voice cracked with emotion. "If you're watching this, then I was right. I suspected manipulations. Maybe by the time you see this, they'll have buried everything. But not this. I left a second will, hidden but real. The truth is yours if you dare to fight for it." Each syllable landed like a hammer against the steel of my resolve. My throat tightened. Not from sorrow. Not anymore. This wasn't mourning. This was cold fury, distilled and clear. I wiped the tears from my cheeks, not even sure when they had started to fall. He had trusted me.
Me.
When no one else would. By mid-morning, the sky had brightened, but my mind was still dark with purpose. I tossed a bag into the back seat of my car and drove with no music, just the engine humming beneath me like a war drum. My path cut through familiar roads, from my cramped apartment on the city's edge to the quiet, manicured neighborhood where my parents lived. Each passing street felt like shedding skin, shedding fear. Their house stood exactly as I remembered it, pristine, smug, and hollow. I pulled into the driveway, clutching a thick manila folder stuffed with evidence. Bank records, screen captures of digital metadata, copies of Grandpa's handwritten notes, clauses he'd scribbled and then later scratched out when he'd changed his mind. Pieces of the puzzle they had hoped no one would ever complete. I didn't knock. I walked in like I belonged there because I did. My mother sat on the living room couch, in her favorite spot under the painting of the lake we used to visit. Her back was straight. Her hands were folded neatly on her lap. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable, and said, "Lyra, this isn't the time." My hand hovered just long enough before I dropped the folder onto the coffee table with a solid thump. "It's over," she added gently, but the way she spoke felt rehearsed. I steadied my voice. "It's never over when you bury the truth." She didn't move. Her eyes lowered, fixated on her lap. "Chasing ghosts won't make you matter more." I flinched, but only for a second. Then I met her gaze, steel against porcelain. "I don't want to matter," I said. "I want him remembered right." Her silence said more than any insult ever could. I left without another word, the click of the door echoing behind me.
She didn't follow.
She never did. Back in my apartment, I pulled out Grandpa's old vault drive, a sleek black device he'd once joked was more valuable than any trust fund. When I plugged it in, layers of encryption asked for passcodes only he and I would know. Childhood memories. Old family jokes. The name of his first boat. It clicked open. And there it was. Video files. Letters. Voice recordings. Backup copies of legal documents, some dating back decades. I copied the confession to 3 separate encrypted cloud accounts. I created secure links and drafted a message to Thaddeus, someone I trusted more than family at this point. If anything happens to me, leak everything. I pressed send. Then I sent a trimmed version to a legal watchdog account, anonymous, but known to dig deep and expose frauds involving inheritance disputes. My hands didn't shake anymore. Hours later, Thaddeus texted, posted a clip to the estate forum. Already getting traction. I clicked the link. There it was, a 47-second clip, titled, When the Family You Trust Sells Your Legacy. Grandpa's voice rang out on screen, raw, real, undeniable. Comments began flooding in. This was always suspicious. I didn't see this coming. Finally, someone's talking. The thread exploded. My heart raced, but it wasn't fear. Not anymore. It was something sharp. Something alive. That night, I sat in my dark living room, my phone glowing in my hand, scrolling through reactions and reposts. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the weight lift just slightly from my chest. The silence had cracked.
The truth was loud now.
It had teeth. Then came the knock. My body jerked as if struck. I crept to the door, heart pounding, but found no one. Just a plain white envelope taped to the wood. No stamp. No signature. Inside, an elegant invitation card. Grand opening, Dorian Center for Ethical Living, Callista Hale Foundation. I blinked. My grandfather's name, twisted into some sanitized tribute. I turned the card over.
Speeches. Press.
Recognition. No mention of me. A sticky note was attached in careful handwriting. If you show up uninvited again, we'll have you removed. I let out a breathless laugh, part disbelief, part grim satisfaction. They were scrambling. They were scared. I folded the card and slid it into my coat pocket. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their stage. I turned off the lights, sinking into the quiet again. But this time the silence didn't consume me. I stared at the ceiling, adrenaline still burning beneath my skin. I wasn't broken. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't afraid. Something inside me had finally ignited. And I wasn't going to let it burn out. The sticky note had nearly dissolved in my sweaty palm by the time I reached the sidewalk. Its ink faded, but its message burned into my mind. They rewrote everything. The legacy. The will. Your name. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, louder than the city noise around me. The threat was real, and so was the theft. I could no longer afford the safety of silence. The morning air felt thick as I walked with purpose, my steps sharper than usual. I didn't need permission. Not anymore. I wasn't a ghost in their story. I was the author of my own. Armed not with anger, but with clarity, I left my apartment and made my way to the grand event I was never meant to attend. The Dorian Center for Ethical Living rose like a glass temple in the heart of the city. Banners whipped in the wind, bearing Callista Hale's name in golden script. Torchbearer of Legacy. The words made my stomach turn. Before the entrance, a bronze statue glinted in the sunlight. Callista, cast in triumph, one hand raised as if guiding others. Beside her stood a figure carved in my grandfather's likeness, his hand resting on her shoulder like anointing, as though she were the chosen one. I wasn't invited. I wasn't welcome, but I belonged. Wearing charcoal gray slacks, a nondescript blazer, and oversized sunglasses, I slipped through a side entrance while the front overflowed with donors, media, and distant relatives playing dress-up in borrowed dignity. Inside, the foyer was awash in white orchids, sleek lighting, and polished marble. Everything reeked of curated elegance, down to the curated lies. At the welcome table, glossy brochures displayed headlines like Vision, Honor, Progress. Every one of them featured Callista's face. Not a single one mentioned mine. I hovered near the edge of the crowd, unnoticed, listening. A staff member gushed to a guest in a designer blazer. We're so proud to see Callista fulfill her grandfather's vision. My jaw tensed. The word "we" clanged in my ears like a bell I wasn't allowed to ring. Then came the portraits, lined up along the wall like an exhibit. My grandfather laughing with Callista. My grandfather giving a speech with Callista in the wings. My grandfather holding a shovel at the center's groundbreaking. Callista beside him, smiling, hand on his arm. I searched those frames for a trace of myself. A photo. A caption. A corner. Nothing. It was like I had never existed. I followed the crowd into the auditorium. Velvet seats, low murmurs. The lights dimmed. A string quartet began playing as Callista ascended the stage in a perfectly pressed ivory pantsuit. She paused, soaking in the adoration like sunlight. She began her speech with a warm smile. My grandfather believed in ethical futures. He believed in legacy.
And he believed in me.
I didn't blink. She spoke of her devotion, her tireless effort, how she had safeguarded his intentions in the final years. She painted herself as steward of a soul. The audience ate it up, smiling, nodding, even weeping. I remained still, anchored in my seat like stone. My hands clenched under the seat. I wanted to scream. Instead, I followed her out quietly after the applause. Outside, near the bronze statue, I waited. The crowd dispersed around us, lost in conversation. Callista noticed me only when I stepped forward. Not even a plaque? I asked, voice low. A photograph? A single line? Her expression stiffened, the corner of her mouth twitching. You didn't earn legacy, she said coolly. You inherited obscurity. I took a breath. The old me would have folded, apologized, maybe, but not now. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I turned and walked away, leaving her in her gleaming shadow. That night, back in my apartment, I turned on one lamp and sat at my dining table with a glass of water and the hard truth. I opened my laptop. For weeks I had collected pieces, bank transfers, meeting records, and signed letters. Now they had a name, a purpose. I filed a lawsuit. It was meticulous, not emotional. Whistleblower protections shielded my identity. The charges: fraud, forgery, coercion, unethical exploitation of an elderly man. I named Callista Hale and Corvin and Associates directly. Quietly. Precisely. The system may have tried to erase me, but it would have to read my name now. Within days, subpoenas landed on desks. Corvin's firm, once untouchable, began sweating under scrutiny. One partner went silent. A junior associate resigned after discovering internal emails. One of those emails, leaked to an anonymous legal blog, included Callista's own words. Adjust will clauses accordingly. He's fading. We must act quietly and irrevocably. It spread fast in quiet circles. The judge ordered the will frozen, pending review. The center sponsors pulled back, issuing statements of neutrality. Behind closed doors, Callista's empire trembled. Thaddeus guided me from the shadows, ensuring the media wouldn't catch my name too early. We agreed no interviews. Not yet. The truth needed more time to bloom. Then came the court's notice. Motion to investigate will. Granted. No fireworks. Just black ink on a white screen. I sat in my kitchen, staring at it, and smiled. Not out of vengeance, but relief. Someone had finally listened. That night, as I scrolled through headlines, one blog post caught my eye. The Silent Heir. Who is the real legacy? I read it twice, then saw the message arrive from a journalist I vaguely remembered from a previous protest event. Would you like to tell your story? I stared at the blinking cursor, then typed back. Not yet. I'm not done digging. Because the truth doesn't need a spotlight to exist. It just needs a gatekeeper. And I had finally become mine. I paced the floor of my apartment long after midnight, the soles of my feet memorizing every creak in the hardwood. Outside, the streetlights threw warped reflections across the glass windows, slithering along the walls like ghosts dancing in silence. The air inside was heavy, thick with anticipation. The petition had been filed. The legal gears had begun their slow but deliberate turn. Still, no one outside my circle knew just how deep I'd gone, or how much deeper I planned to dig. I stood still for a moment in the darkness and whispered into the silence. Not yet. I'm not done digging. When morning came, I didn't sleep. The air felt too crisp, too alert, as if it too knew something was shifting. I brewed coffee, but it sat untouched as I scrolled through my inbox. Thaddeus had sent over new links, articles, hashtags, forum threads. People were finally paying attention. Activist groups had latched onto the story, demanding an audit of the Dorian Center's funding and questioning the legitimacy of its public narrative. One article titled, Legacy or Lie? Asked why a center supposedly built on familial devotion had no mention of Lyra, no photos, no history, not even a name buried in the fine print. That silence now screamed. I leaned into the storm. The evidence I had so carefully gathered, altered documents, metadata, scanned signatures, was already circulating in hushed circles. Now I sent it directly to a local nonprofit watchdog, known for pursuing cases exactly like this. I removed every trace of my name. Let them find the truth without knowing the voice behind it. Then came the waiting. 2 weeks passed like a wire pulled taut, humming with tension but never snapping. Each day, I opened the news expecting nothing, and each day I braced for everything. Then, on a Monday morning, it happened. The city announced it was launching a formal review of the Dorian Center's permit and financial disclosures. The statement was brief, clinical, but to me it felt like someone had thrown open the windows of a locked attic. For the first time in years, I felt the weight begin to lift. I sat frozen in my apartment, listening to the quiet hum of justice moving, finally, in my direction. Days later, I heard machinery before sunrise. Curious, I peeked through my blinds. There it was. A demolition crew, under city orders, was dismantling the statue that had long stood in the center's garden. Callista, devoted granddaughter, chiseled in ivory stone, now caught in the glare of construction lights and camera flashes. One reel at a time, the base was taken apart. Journalists gathered behind barricades. Passers-by slowed to take photos. On social media, the speculation exploded. Was she faking it all along? Whose legacy was it really? Everything she claimed, built on someone else's silence. By mid-afternoon, her PR team had released a vague statement. By nightfall, they'd all resigned. Then the flood came. Sponsorships dropped her. Boards removed her name from upcoming events. Influencers who once praised her now posted reactions dissecting her downfall. And Callista, once the polished darling of philanthropic media, uploaded a shaky, dimly lit video. Her voice cracked, her eyes darted off camera. I believed I earned his blessing, she said. I never meant to erase anyone. But the internet showed no mercy. Parody videos surfaced within hours. Editorials called her the symbol of performative legacy. Her empire didn't just crumble, it imploded. And then, the unexpected happened. That evening, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. It was my father. His voice was barely above a whisper. Lyra, I need to see you. Alone. Something in his tone made my breath catch. He sounded old. Not in years, but in weight. In regret. We met the next afternoon at Greenwood Ridge Cemetery, beneath a canopy of golden-leafed trees. The wind rustled the branches gently, and the headstone I hadn't visited in months stood solemnly in the distance. He was already there when I arrived, hunched slightly, hands tucked into his coat pockets, like a child unsure of what to say. His eyes were red-rimmed, and when he turned toward me, the man who once shouted me out of his home now looked smaller, diminished not by time, but by truth. I saw the confession video, he said after a long silence. His voice cracked. I believed her. I didn't want to believe anything else. Because if I did, I'd have to admit how wrong I was. Tears welled in his eyes. Slowly, they spilled over, carving soft trails down his weathered face. And then, for the first time in my life, I heard it. I'm sorry. No excuses. No finger-pointing. Just that. I didn't run to him. I didn't cry. I simply stood there, nodding slowly, feeling something heavy unravel inside me. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years, I said. He looked away, ashamed. I don't expect you to hug me, he muttered. I just needed you to know that I finally see it. All of it. His admission didn't heal the wounds, but it pressed a balm against them. I reached out, not a full embrace, just my hand resting lightly on his slumped shoulder. He startled, then steadied. We walked slowly through the cemetery in silence, passing row after row of names and memories. Near the back, I saw it, volunteers working quietly installing a new memorial bench. Drawn to it, I stepped closer. A brass plaque gleamed in the slanting light. The engraving stopped me in my tracks. In memory of Dorian, loved by all, remembered by Lyra. My throat tightened. My hand trembled as I touched the cool metal. The leaves stirred around us in a gentle wind, whispering through the branches like a lullaby. It was quiet, still. For the first time in what felt like years, I exhaled. The morning was unusually still, as though the world itself were pausing to witness what I was about to do. The autumn sun filtered through the trees, casting long golden shadows across Greenwood Ridge. I parked at the edge of the trail and made my way through the familiar path, each step softened by damp leaves and memories. The bouquet of white lilies I carried trembled slightly in my hands, not from the breeze, but from the weight of everything they meant. The memorial bench came into view, nestled in its quiet corner beneath the sycamore tree. The bronze plaque caught the sun just right, glowing with warmth and quiet dignity. In honor of Lyra, who chose truth over silence. That single sentence held lifetimes. To my surprise, a woman sat there, reading a dog-eared paperback, her back straight but relaxed. Her coat was faded, her shoes scuffed. She looked ordinary, the way people do when they've carried burdens and survived them. She noticed me, but didn't move. Her presence didn't feel intrusive. It felt
Right.
like the world was starting to notice what mattered. I stepped forward and laid the lilies on the bench. A gentle breeze danced through the petals, lifting one and setting it near the woman's lap. She glanced at it, then back at the plaque, and gave me a small nod. No words exchanged, just quiet acknowledgement, the kind that says, "I see you." Children's laughter echoed down the path. A boy tugged at his mother's hand and pointed. "Look, remembered by Lyra." "Who's Lyra?" he asked. The mother knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Someone important," she said gently, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. That simple moment broke something in me. Not in a painful way, but like a final crack in the dam before water rushes free. No matter what my family erased, no matter what they denied, this truth stood, out in the open. Not a mansion, not a statue, but a bench, something real. Something mine. That evening, an unexpected message arrived from my mother. "Dinner.
Just family.
Let's move forward."
No emojis.
No forced politeness. Just 9 words that landed like a stone in my chest. I debated whether to go. But I knew this was the last step I needed to take, not for them, but for me. The dinner was modest. No journalists lurking in the shadows, no charity photographers posing us under chandeliers. Just the family, or what was left of it. My father wore an old cashmere sweater, like he used to when he still tried. My mother looked tired, eyes rimmed in concealer that couldn't hide the months of scandal and whispers. Callista poured wine with trembling hands. "To healing," she said, raising her glass. Her voice was thin, rehearsed, but trying. I stood. My hand barely shook as I lifted my own glass. The room fell silent. "To truth," I said, letting each syllable hang in the air. "And what it cost." The clink of crystal glasses sounded like a chime echoing in a cathedral. But it was my mother's hand that told the real story, frozen mid-lift, lips parted, unsure whether to smile or speak. My father's face shifted in the span of a breath, confusion, then discomfort, then something resembling regret. I reached into my purse and pulled out 5 sealed envelopes, each with a name carefully written in my own hand. "I wrote something for each of you," I said, setting them down one by one, around the table. "They're not apologies. And they're not invitations. They're for remembrance, yours and mine." Then, before a single word could be spoken in return, I left. I walked out into the soft night. The crickets had returned, their song a steady hum in the silence behind me. As I got into my car, I could almost hear the rustling of paper, my family opening the envelopes. I imagined their hands tightening around the photographs, the audit reports, the printed transcripts. And then, my note, just one line. "You taught me silence." But I unlearned it. I drove for miles, not to escape, but to arrive. On the outskirts of town stood a modest, 2-story building with a hand-painted sign, House of Dorian, Community Therapy and Legacy Healing. The headlights caught its porch steps, and I pulled in, heart beating steady and full. Inside, the warmth was immediate, not just physical, but emotional. Soft chairs and muted colors, calming art lining the walls, the scent of sage and lavender drifting from a nearby diffuser. Somewhere deeper inside the house, children laughed, not in the way kids do when forced to perform, but genuinely, innocently. I walked through slowly, absorbing it all. This place had no stage, no judgment. Just presence. And in it, the echo of Grandpa's voice. Healing doesn't shout. It shows up quietly and stays. Hours later, curled on my sofa at home, the world buzzed again. My phone lit up with 1,000 notifications. A video link flashed at the top. Confession video trending worldwide. I tapped play. There she was, Callista. Not in designer gowns or flawless lighting, but raw, pale, under the weight of the truth. Her voice trembled. She admitted everything. How the inheritance was manipulated. How her parents spun lies for control. How they tried to erase me. She always spoke the truth, Callista said on screen. eyes red. I tried to destroy her for it. The comment section was relentless. Lyra was the real one. She warned them. This is what justice looks like. I watched her face as the mask fell, not out of cruelty, but clarity. She had carried the lies so long, she'd forgotten how to breathe without it. I turned the screen off and set the phone aside. The glow dimmed. My lungs felt tight, not from panic, but release. My heartbeat slowed. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next betrayal, the next blow, the next denial. The war was over. And in the stillness, I found something I hadn't felt since childhood.
Peace.
The night had folded around me like a gentle shroud, quiet and complete, when I finally set the phone down for the last time. Its blue glow faded into the room's stillness, leaving behind only the soft hum of a world settling. My chest, once tight with the weight of too many memories, felt lighter, emptied of the noise, the blame, the relentless craving to be understood. I lay motionless in the hush, inhaling slowly, exhaling the ache. With my eyes closed, it wasn't sleep I craved, it was peace. For the first time, I wasn't struggling to be seen. I was simply learning how to be free. Fog hugged the early morning like a second skin. Greenwood Ridge Cemetery sat cloaked in that soft gray mist, turning monuments into phantoms of stone. I walked slowly, each step on the gravel muffled, each breath laced with the scent of damp soil and pine. It was the kind of morning that didn't ask questions, only offered quiet. Thaddeus was already there, kneeling by Grandpa's grave, a candle flickering steady beside him and a folded newspaper in his hand. The headline read, "The silent air breaks through." He didn't speak when he saw me. He didn't have to. He just gave a slow nod, the kind that said everything words couldn't hold. We stood like two shadows in mourning and rebirth, the mist closing around us like a veil. I knelt beside him, reaching into my coat pocket for the old letter Grandpa gave me years ago, creased, fragile, familiar. As I unfolded it, the paper crackled like it still carried a heartbeat. I read it aloud, softly but clearly. Never let anyone rewrite your name. The words settled into the air like prayer, the wind lifting the edges of the page, but not my voice. I held firm, and in doing so, I felt Grandpa's steadiness wrap around me, firmer than any embrace I'd ever known. He wasn't just gone. He had become part of my foundation. Somewhere across town, in a gilded house that once echoed with smug laughter and camera rehearsals, Callista sat before a dim screen. Her empire of influence, once curated with filters, carefully lit tributes and crocodile tears, was collapsing like a house of cards. The viral video played in a loop, her grief unraveling under the harsh light of truth. Brands that once courted her turned their backs. Emails went unanswered. Her social media became a museum of still life. She hovered over my grandfather's legacy video, once pinned, once praised, and deleted it. One click.
Gone.
The silence that followed was deafening. Justice didn't arrive in sirens or courtroom monologues. It crept quietly, like frost over glass. My parents, those relentless architects of lies, found their voices strangely absent at social gatherings. People who once welcomed their company now avoided their names. Their invitations dried up. Even their smug smiles faltered in photos, which came fewer and farther between. There were no headlines, no dramatic exposés. Just a slow unraveling. And deep within the vaults of a trust they thought they could bend, my name was restored.
Quietly.
Legally.
Permanently.
Later that afternoon, I returned to the House of Dorian. It was different now. Brighter, filled with the rhythm of healing. Children's laughter spilled from the workshop windows like sunlight. Inside, I led a grief therapy session for families of veterans, mothers, widows, siblings, sons. Some lost to war. Some to silence. Some to the weight of what was never said. A boy no older than 8 shyly handed me a drawing. It was of a man with kind eyes and a strong chin. "He looked like mine," he said. My throat tightened. "Tell me about him," I replied gently. Stories unfolded like soft cloths in that room. Some stitched with tears, others with memory. And in listening, I felt something shift. The weight of vengeance that had clung to me for so long, it began to lift. Not because the past didn't matter, but because the future finally did. This was my true inheritance. Not land or legacy, but the ability to create something better from what had been broken. This was what I had fought for, not just justice, but connection. Humanity. That night, I returned home and lit a candle on my desk. The room was dim, but warm. My journal lay open. I wrote without hesitation. They never said sorry, but they lost something I still carry. I paused. Then beneath it, I added. My scars became my script. My silence became my signature. The words felt right. Not triumphant. Not bitter. Just real. I hovered the pen a moment longer, then closed the journal. I no longer needed vengeance to define me. I didn't need their apology to validate me. Some chapters don't close with forgiveness. They close with growth. With a choice to move forward anyway. Outside, the wind whispered its secrets through the trees. I slipped on my coat and walked down the familiar path toward the garden bench engraved for Grandpa. It stood beneath the old oak, surrounded by fading blooms and autumn leaves. On the bronze plaque, a single fresh flower had been placed. Beneath it, the words etched in metal red. Remembered by Lyra. I stood there for a long time, my fingertips tracing the cold letters. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just felt grief, strength, and something like peace. Then, I turned and began to walk away. Not because I had forgotten what they did. Not because I had forgiven them. But because I finally knew where I was going. And I didn't need to look back. Sometimes, the deepest wounds aren't caused by strangers. They're carved by those we once called family. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about reclaiming your voice when others tried to bury it. What about you? Have you ever been pushed aside by the people meant to protect you? How did you rise above it? If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There are more real, raw, and powerful family stories to come. Let's keep the conversation going.